Welcome back, everybody, and today we are going to be taking a look at a new sort of meta that's been forming over the course of champs that involves the Frenzy, everyone's favorite pistol. So before champs even started, the Frenzy was like barely ever used. In fact, there used to be a meta involving the Frenzy way back in the day, kind of called the raid boss or the mini boss meta, where someone would buy somebody else a frenzy, usually the duelist, and then the duelist would buy light shields and utility. And so they'd be kind of like a raid boss for the pistol round, and they would go in, you know, try and take as many fights as possible because they have extra shields in addition to a good weapon. But we haven't seen that very often lately, and up until this champs, we barely ever saw frenzies bought in pistol rounds. It's always ghosts, sheriffs, sometimes a shorty, and then usually classics, right? But today we're going to take a look at this meta, see if it's actually worth following or if it's just a quick fad that happened in champs and we're probably not going to see much of anymore. So in group stage, we had 29 rounds where the frenzy was bought. Out of 94 total pistol rounds. That's only a 31% win rate, or buy rate, sorry. And 27 of those 29 rounds were non-mirror games, which basically means one side had a frenzy, whereas the other team did not have any frenzies. And of the 29 rounds, 34 frenzies were used. And the win rate was actually really good. It was 18 wins out of 27, which is a 66.7% win rate. And it was generally about the same, both on attack and defense. Defense being really, really strong. Attack also very strong, both well over 50% win rate. But things sort of change when we come into the playoff stage. So the rounds bought actually go up, especially in comparison to the rounds played. So we have a 37.8% buy rate, or round use rate, and 24 non-mirror games rather than 27, which means that there were more games where both teams had the frenzy. And there were a total of 40 frenzies bought. But shockingly, the win rate of this frenzy buy went down a huge margin. So it's 13 wins out of 31 rounds, only 41.9%. And most of that is because of this attack stat. The defense, you know, it's 50-50. It really didn't make much difference, but the attack stat went down significantly. And now let's take a look at these stats next to each other so that we kind of have a reference and see what changed. So the 30.9% went up 6.9%. So there's more usage in less rounds. So 31 out of 82 rather than 94. So there's less rounds total overall, but still more frenzies used. There were this should say mirror, not non-mirror. 7 games that were mirrored, meaning both teams had pistols. Both teams had frenzies, which is much more than in the group stage. More frenzies used overall, but generally about the same, and then a huge dip in win rate. And this is a small sample size, of course, only about 200 games, not even 200 games total, or rounds that is, which would mean that it's not even 100 actual matches played or maps played. And you know, I don't really understand why it went down so much, especially on the attack. Like, it went down on the defense as well, but 50% win rate is still like a reasonable. But it went down so far on the attack that I feel like there must be something that caused it, you know? And looking back at the games, I've rewatched some of the games, and I watched most of the games live, and I don't really notice anything that's like, oh yeah, if he had a ghost there, you know, instead of a frenzy, or if they had a frenzy there instead of a classic, I didn't see that many differences, you know? So while I think this is a very interesting meta, and I'm glad that there's more use cases for the frenzy nowadays, I don't really think that it's making that much of a difference, at least in pro play. Like, I think that you should experiment around in comp, you know, see what you like, but in pro play, it doesn't really seem to make a difference. But that being said, I want to bring us to our next point, which is G2. So they obviously were the ones that kind of started the Stinger meta long ago. Several months ago, they were the ones that were buying Stingers on like round 2, even if they lost, and they were turning over a lot of anti-ecos and things like that, all thanks to the Stinger. And they seem to be the new Frenzy guys as well, because in Champs, every single pistol round, except for one, I miscounted, it should be 23 rounds here, but almost every single pistol round they played, Jogmo bought a Frenzy, and sometimes Leaf would buy a Frenzy, and there was one time where 3 of them bought a Frenzy. I think Trent or maybe Jonah P was the other one. And they had a reasonable win rate, the 45.8% win rate, so it's a little less than normal, but like still reasonable. But I once again, I don't understand why, because they're doing this on every single map. It's not just like, oh, on Lotus we buy a Frenzy because there's a lot of close range fights or something like that, but they do it on every single map. They bought it on Abyss, Lotus, Haven, you know, every single map. Jogma would have a Frenzy and Leaf would usually have one as well. And I just don't understand why. The one thing that I think might be is because it's basically just a less expensive Stinger. It has 5 less bullets, a little bit slower of a firing rate, but generally you can use it in about the same way that you would use a Stinger, and G2 are extremely comfortable with Stingers, so they must have thought that, you know, if they're bringing in a basically slightly weaker Stinger into a pistol buy, it'll still be better than general pistols. And I have a couple of instances that we'll look at, rounds that G2 have used this Frenzy in a very similar way that they would use a Stinger. So let's take a look at this round here. It's G2 versus DRG. Trent and Jogmo are in a 2v4 and the spike is down. Jog instantly gets Demon 1 here and he's in a 1v3. He gets blinded. He's in a really bad spot. He gets shot in the back but manages to kill Flexen, and then he peeks out and gets both. Like, it's a really incredibly hype moment, 1v4 clutch, but he's using the Frenzy in almost the exact same way that someone would use a Stinger. So let's watch it back. He gets Demon 1. It's just a plain ass 1v3, right? He gets another one. Now what I find interesting about that kill is he kind of tap fires, which you can't exactly do with a Stinger. Like, you can, but Stinger is really inaccurate with tap fire, but the Frenzy actually does have a relatively accurate tap fire. Not from long range, but from mid to close range, the tap fire is generally accurate, and he manages to get Flexen with that tap fire. And then he manages to peek out, and he uses it almost exactly like he would a Stinger, right? He gets one quick kill, like fades away so that he has a chance to reload or to reassess, and then he peeks out again, gets the fourth kill. And now let's take a look at this round between paperrex and G2. Is the very first playoffs game, and this is actually G2's second round bye. So they've got Stingers, they have a Bulldog, Jogmo has an Outlaw, but importantly, Valen, in addition to having a Stinger, has a Frenzy, and I think that this round shows how nearly interchangeable the Frenzy and the Stinger are. So let's run it forward and we'll see some examples of that. Jogmo gets a early pick here onto Forsaken and TP's out, and now it's basically just Valen on site. He gets killed with the Stinger, and then he mows down 2 with the Frenzy, and we'll see it again in the replay here, but he basically uses the Frenzy in the exact same way that he's using the Stinger. It just so happens that his Stinger ran out of ammo and there were still people fighting him, right? So let's see it again. Get the kill. Now here we are. He gets the kill onto something, and then he sprays down 2, just like he would with a Stinger. So there we go. Like, I don't know. It seems like a mini Stinger. I personally am going to be using it more in comp, I think, but I wouldn't go so far as to doing the G2 strat of buying it every single pistol round, right? Like, I think that it does make a difference in some scenarios. Like, I think on Icebox B side, it would be really good to have a Frenzy. I think maybe Haven B site or Haven A short would be good to have a Frenzy. But like on maps, larger maps like Lotus, maybe Abyss, you know, if Breeze, God forbid, ever came back into the meta, I would not go for the Frenzy. I would probably stick to a Ghost or a Sheriff if you're like a duelist, like Jet or Brain or something like that. So is the Frenzy actually the new meta? I'm gonna say no, but I think it was an interesting experiment, and I'm interested to see more people experiment with these sorts of pistol round buys, second round buys in the future. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed and thought this was an interesting topic, and like and subscribe, and peace out.